Welcome. I'm Dr. Daniel Foor. It's good to have you with us. I am happy to be here with three esteemed guests today, Graham, Bhola, and Shannon, and I will allow them when we share to introduce themselves rather than take a lot of time up front. And the intent of our discussion today, which we're calling Animism for the People, is just a way, an invitation to explore this topic of how we come back into relationship. Not only, but especially for folks who weren't raised with a framework for valuing and going deep with our relationships with the other than humans, with the ancestors, the deities, the land, the elementals, etc. How do we reclaim that when we weren't raised with it? What helps with that? What gets in the way of that? What can we say about it, especially from folks who have been living into that for some years, as our guests have. There'll be a bit of time, I believe, for questions. We'll be here for 90 minutes, and I'll make just a few remarks up front to frame where we're headed. For one, where I'm speaking from, I'm a descendant of early German English settler colonialists in North America. So those are my ancestors of blood. I live on traditional Cherokee land, occupied land, as the Americas are here in Western North Carolina, with my wife and two daughters. And I'm a doctor of psychology and a therapist, but mostly I'm a ritualist and have a bit of a specialization in relating with the ancestors. And I'm also the founder, director at Ancestral Medicine. So I have the curious job of being a professional ritualist. So it's a bit about me. And as for why the focus on animism, and Graham can speak to this in depth because I'm drawing on his work, and it's nice to be here with you, Graham. But as I understand it, animism is a useful way to refer to an ethic of relationship that recognizes that living human folks are just one kind of person. We're embedded in a much wider network or field of relationships with all kinds of other differently bodied people, some of whom are visible to us, some of whom are not. And because of that, that invokes ethical, moral implications, accountability, a need to try to relate well with the others. That basic value set is not limited to only Indigenous cultures, but it often is fairly present in most Indigenous cultures, not all. And it's something that personally I view as a value set being really, really important for humans to embody if we're going to turn the corner culturally on the ecological mess and cultural mess we're trying to navigate right now. And so for me, it's been an imperative to know how to live that in my own life, not just in the abstract public way, but in my parenting, my relationships, how I navigate. And it's what I'm teaching and trying to help others with. And so it's actually really relevant issue about how we learn that or not, what helps, what doesn't. And with that, I'll say one other thing, which is that most people who one could describe as animist could care less about that term. It's an intellectual way of having, for me, what feels like a more value neutral way to refer to a relational set of values that doesn't have to justify itself based on indigeneity. So there's a like respect for the way that identifying as Indigenous is. Not everybody's Indigenous in the way that that word is used. I'm not an Indigenous person. I don't need to try to be in order to love the earth and be in relationship with the spirits. So for me, part of what landed really helpfully with your book, Graham, and Animism, Respecting the Living World, I think is what it's called, is a way of talking about these values without having to identify with Indigenous cultures in a way that gets kind of sticky and strange and colonialist and problematic. So the question that I want to open up to our presenters so we can head into dialogue is, what have you noticed in your work in the world, in your service, in your studies, is especially helpful for people who weren't raised with a framework of relationship, but have come to acquire that as adults, for people who are choosing to come back into more conscious relationship with the other than humans, the rest of life. What seems helpful in that? What can we notice about it? And I wonder, Graham, if you would be willing to lead us off, and feel welcome to say anything you wish about your own background, and then we'll uh, let ourselves be introduced in that way. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your introduction. Thank you, everyone for joining us. It's a privilege to be part of this conversation. I see some good friends in the group here, and lots of new friends possibly coming. So I'm Graham Harvey. I'm a professor in the study of religions at the Open University, which is the largest university in the UK. It's a largely distance and online learning environment. So we reach out to students who don't necessarily have school leaving certificates, and we make it possible for them to get degrees as good as anywhere else. My research among the religions has shifted through my career in various strange and wonderful, strange to me, ways as well, from a PhD about ancient Jewish sectarianism to researching among contemporary pagans of many kinds, to more recent research among different indigenous people, different parts of the world. And in that phase of my research, well, in both the pagan and the indigenous phase of my research, I kept meeting people whose engagement with the world was thoroughly counter to the modern Cartesian separation of humans from other species, the idea that humans are very different to other beings, that we're somehow the pinnacle of evolution or something. And I started hearing the word animism and began to research among people who some identified as animists, some didn't, but all had this attitude that I kind of sum up as understanding, treating the world as a community of persons, most of whom are not human, all of whom deserve respect. And the challenge then is to find ways, locally appropriate ways to show respect. So I now live in the northwest, shouldn't say that too loudly, northeast of England, near the River South Tyne, and literally 5 minutes from the South Tyne, and 3 miles south of Hadrian's Wall. So an interesting place to think about border zones and transitions between ecosystems, as well as historical imperial boundaries. So we're therefore not that far also from the Scottish boundary. So some of that locatedness affects my understanding of how to try and relate to the world, because I come from elsewhere in England, and I'm trying to find ways to understand how to be part of this living community as well as human community. Some people understand that better if I say that my wife, who's a Geordie, when speaking to her brother, uses words I have never heard before, and they think they're speaking English. So there's a kind of intriguing, how do you fit in with these different communities? And it becomes more complex when you stretch beyond that. Maybe if I stop before I begin to answer Daniel's question, maybe the others introduce themselves and then we come back to the big question of what we've noticed in trying to understand how people reconnect and so on. Does that make sense?
Sure, that sounds good, Graham. Thank you. Yeah. Shannon?
Welcome, everyone. I'm honored to be here, so thank you for the invite, Daniel, and to just be here with esteemed Graham and my beloved mentor and teacher, Bhola Nath Bansola. So honored here. Thank you, Baba. My name is Shannon Willis, and I live on the historic lands of the Creek Muskogee people here in Athens, Georgia. Although my background is historically rooted in Louisiana, which is where I was partially raised, along with having the benefit of being raised in the Sudan, and a little bit all over the world in America most of my childhood. I moved around a lot. My background, of course, I have a master's degree in professional leadership and counseling. And for a good 25 years of that professional life, I was rooted in doing domestic violence and social advocacy for sexual assault and sex trafficking victims. And so I came into this wider web of relations in a sense of practicality for my own needs, is that I always noticed how my life was pretty much driven through the dreams that I would have. And my dreams tended to inform what was going to happen to me next. As being raised a Catholic, there was no accounting for or no landing for what was happening and how these things were happening. And so I began to really search for meaning into the wider web of relations and moving outside of Catholicism in this greater search for meaning of this real sense that I was sourcing wisdom, I was sourcing plant medicine, I was sourcing location, I was sourcing connection with deities that I had never known before that were coming actively into my dreams, and then searching for them and finding synchronicity. And so eventually I landed on finding tutelage under Bhola, under Daniel, and through my Luo in Nigeria, and everything began to take on meaning there. And since then, I have been seeing clients. So I work at the intersection of dream work as a ritualist and psychopomp work to support people through what's happening for them and how to navigate their lives. And I've been doing that work for the past 10 years. And so I'm delighted to be here on the panel because I can speak very practically about what that intersection has looked like as I've served people. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Really good to have you with us. Yeah. And Bhola?
Namaskar, namaste, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the group and to esteemed Harvey and Daniel and all the known and unknown friends. I'm from Nepal and presently in northern Poland. So the topic of discussion, animism, this really resonates today than ever. Animism, if we just think about, it's more about propitiating, honoring known and unknown. So animism opens a wider range of things, looking at, understanding, feeling our own self, our relationship with the environment, especially where we live. I should say that animism is a heritage, is a world heritage, and animism brings us back home. Many a times we end up looking for truth and teachings from far off land, but our environment, our neighborhood is completely forgotten. And I'm here now in this beautiful retreat with 42 acres of land here. And in this connection, yesterday our group did the work of clearing the pond, the water source. And this morning we established a beautiful Naga shrine to honor the Nagas, and we did a Naga ceremony. So the Nagas, the Earth Mother, the elemental beings, all this interconnection here, and we had a quite practical transmission, and we learned about the way in Poland, how they look at the animistic aspect of life, and I transmitted my way of looking at the things and our very long heritage lineage of working with the ancestors, with the elemental beings, with the environment. So it is really a good time and wonderful time to be connected with you all. I'm from Nepal, and we have affinity because I practice shamanism, and shamanism and animism are twin brothers. They go hand in hand. Animism is the base of understanding many, many more things. So bringing out this discussion, I'm sure there will be many questions and curiosity about how the traditional societies look at animism, the nature and our connection with them, and how we develop our spiritual practices through that, and especially about the incorporation of spirit, connecting to them, communicating with them, and offering the rituals and ceremonies to honor them from time to time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhola. Yeah. Yeah, to dip into this opening question a little, I'll add something that training as a therapist and a doctor of psychology, one thing I was aware of throughout that process is like, wow, the whole field is almost entirely the study of living human relationships with other living humans and with oneself, which is really valuable and profoundly incomplete in terms of our relational capacities, our like a description of what's actually happening in terms of how many people all over the world are already relating with the other than humans, whether it's their pets, the land, the plants, the ancestors, the deities, etc. And yet those other relationships are interpersonal relationships. As you're foregrounded, Graham, that there are other kinds of people. And in that way, the study of interpersonal relationships necessarily includes the relationship of somebody with Shiva or with their ancestors or with the mosses outside of their home. And what's interesting to me about that is that these other kinds of relationships have their own complex dynamics, just like all the relationships we have with other living humans, especially when they get intimate and we have expectations and longing and desire and projection. And so it's something I've seen over the years in my own journey and in the journey of supporting others to come back into connection with the earth and the other, the spirits, that once it's like you'll know it's working when you start to bring your own baggage to those relationships as well, because you're seeing them as relationships. And so you're worried what the others think. What do the deities think of me? Should I do that? Are they mad? You don't ask for help when you probably would benefit from asking for help because you're a little bit self-reliant, or you get mad at the powers because you think they're supposed to take care of everything in your life and they didn't, or we bring the complex dynamics that we experience with other living humans to our relationship with the other than humans, with the other kinds of people and spirits, etc. That's really fruitful, actually. It might seem like a discouraging thing, but it means that there's an opportunity for positive shift or healing in those relationships that can then transfer into our relationships with other human folks and vice versa, that there's a much wider possibility for relational intimacy. And I think it's part of why a lot of folks who aren't raised with a relational ethic can be so isolated, neurotic, unhappy, and just struggle harder than is needed because of the felt disconnection with the rest of life. It's not that those others aren't there, as Bhola is sharing, you don't need to go away from where you're at on the earth to find connection. But if we're not conditioned or supported to welcome those relationships, then we're not actually going to engage. We're not going to feel the connection in the same way. So I'll say that much to start with, that from the intersection of animism with psychology, there's a real potential for taking what we know about interpersonal relationships with other humans and applying that carefully to these other kinds of relationships, which are also interpersonal relationships. So I'll add that. And then we don't have to necessarily follow an order, but Graham, Shannon, Bhola, anything that occurs is welcome.
I was going to come back in and say thanks to Bhola for using the word propitiation, because that's one of those things that that folk in the West or Europe, by and large, have kind of forgotten as part of our human relationships with the rest of the world. We're so convinced that we're in charge of everything that we don't think of various of the more difficult parts of what's very ordinary in many other religions. So I hope we'll come back to that. But I wanted to come back to the question again that Daniel's raised so nicely about how people reconnect with the world. Okay, so in my introduction, I should have said that I'm very pedantic. So here's a bit of pedantry for you. There is no point in trying to reconnect because you've never been disconnected. So the thing you need to do is not reconnect, but to stop thinking of yourself as disconnected. So that's why very simple things like naming the place that you're living in, going to the river. Okay, there are things that we already do that are about our connection with the larger than human world. We put on coats when we go outside, or we open the windows when it's too hot. We sometimes notice the sunrise, or if we're fortunate to live in a place like here, where we have dark skies, see the stars and wonder at them. Springtime here, we listen to the bird song, and everybody does that. The BBC radio has been full of people talking about the cuckoos coming back from Africa, the swallows and swifts and house martins coming back from Africa. So these are all about connections, but still we imagine ourselves to be disconnected because we also imagine ourselves to be different from the rest of the world. So again, another example from the BBC this morning, there was a guy who's recently published a book about humans and other animals, like minds and bodies, and he was repeating the same old nonsense. Excuse me if you are that person, hope not. Talking about how scientists try to work out if other than human animals have a theory of mind. So the classic experiment you may know about is you put a dab of paint on the back of an animal's head or some sort of color, and then you present it with a mirror. And if the animal tries to remove the thing from itself, not from the mirror, it has a sense of itself, recognizes itself. And if it watches you doing this stuff, it has a theory of mind. Now, that's fine if you think that animals are obsessed by their self-image as I am, as we are, kind of endlessly looking at ourselves in mirrors. But most of them probably aren't. So a much better everyday experiment for those of you who live with cats, dogs, parrots, budgerigars, whatever, is if occasionally you play hide and seek with your companion animal, if it occasionally goes behind a chair or some other barrier and looks around at you and wonders if you've noticed, it knows that you're there, a different being, and that it's waiting for some kind of response. So really, there is no need for these complex laboratory experiments. We just need to remind ourselves that we're part of this multi-species world that's full of acts of relationship. And it's just that humans in many parts of the world, especially Europeans and people of European descent, stop listening. So that's the big thing, really, is recovering our knowledge that we are already completely connected, completely in relationship, and we can't possibly not be in relationship. So the real question is not how to do that. The question is, what are the kind of appropriate etiquettes in the place where you live to engage with other species or other beings, other persons in this amazing world of ours. Sorry, so that went off in different directions. So that's my pedantic response to the how do we connect is we are connected. Let's find a different question about stopping thinking that we're disconnected, and then celebrating all those very everyday ways of being in relationship, and then extend them, make those relationships better, just as you might do with other humans too. So I'll hand over to one of the others to say something.
Thank you for that, Graham, because we are all connected. And so my experience in working with other people, there's a couple of things that come into the intersection of, if I am centering myself, then I cannot be aware of the others that are in the field of relating. And partly we can't divorce ourselves of the impact of the social harms that have created the obstacles to which we can connect. So in my work, what I've found a lot of times, and both from the angle that Daniel is bringing about the intersection of animism and psychology, is our attachments that that we're raised with, or that we're born with, or that we come into the world, and how we project these attachments onto the others that we're relating to. So that if we have an avoidant relating style, we're going to be avoidant to connecting with the other than human realm. We're going to project those fears or those harms or those senses of abandonment, and those create the obstacles to us being really present. And so in my work, what I've found profoundly is useful is stillness, is having people come back into relation with nature and the animate world. They're not disconnected from it, but they're not going to be able to feel like they belong in it until they become very, very still. And then they can hear what's coming in and differentiate what's their voice from what the other voices are. And so this is the way that, you know, if you come through in a Western way into the world, and in my experience of just working in the field divorce of animism, is that there are many people that would come into my office and they would be misdiagnosed as various forms of illnesses along the DSM-4, when what was really happening was that spirit also is trying to connect with them. And these voices can be othered under Western medicine as psychological impairment. And that's a huge obstacle for us, to be able to center and say, oh, listen, I'm sitting by a body of water, and I feel really connected and held by this body of water. Versus, I'm starting to get information that's coming into me now that wasn't there before, and it is not part of me. And this is how the animate world begins to connect with us and longs for us to come back into relationship with it as well. And so when we open up these doorways through an animistic way of connecting with them, it's true that we have to come in a good way, that we have to notice the ways that we bring our humanness in a way that's harmful to these other bodies. So how do we honor the waters? How do we honor the lands? How do we honor the spirits that come? And as Bhola said, it's how are we propitiating them? How are we ritually acknowledging that they're present, and then bringing goodness in this way that it's a two-way relationship, rather than just us feeling like we're at the top of the block of the human chain? Like, what happens when we realize that we are more regular sized in this wider web of relating? And so what I notice more than anything when people come to me is the obstacles that are in their way. Often they say, like, how can I make sure that I'm not making this up? Like, what if it's just in my head? Like, that is the biggest, I think, obstacle from people being able to differentiate that sometimes the things that come into their awareness are actually the others trying to seek connection with us. And so I'm very interested to hear what Bhola would have to bring behind that too as well. And because he was also always in the back of my head around that. And so I appreciate that. But Yeah, mostly that. The obstacle to us is that we, in our own ego attachment, get in our own way of these connections. Yeah, Bhola?
For me, I think the biggest thing is to feel the sense of belonging. The sense of belonging, to be part of the small space and wide open, bigger space. And when we say indigenous, I am 100% convinced that where we live, we are indigenous to that place. I think we made a big separation between indigenous and non-indigenous, who we are, where we came from. So here, I think the animism, spirituality, and the sense of belonging is completely disrupted. If I live in Poland from now onwards, and if I say, I belong to this land here, I connect to this land, I honor the spirits of this land, I respect the culture, the tradition, the practices of this land here, maintaining the essence of the practices I brought from my homeland, and I merge, blend them together, and I create a stronger, more grounded practice. I think that would give more sense and completeness to me, and that completeness can support, I think, the community that live in and around me. So when I think that separation of India, we all are indigenous. Where we live, that is part of us. We may propitiate, we may honor the beings from far off, but all these things are brought to the place where I belong to. It's like, I give an example many times to my group. So the seed is from Nepal Himalayas. We bring that seed and we plant into the soil here in Poland. The tree may grow like the way it is the apple of Mustang exactly here, but the taste can be different. So I think even in our everyday practice, the practices we transmit, we share, that has been exercised and like a perennial flow that has been given to us. And when we share these to the other places, other lands, the same thing is given, the same thing is being taken off, is being studied, practiced. And then when that is being adopted in the local environment, using the objects, the things that are available in that locality, we say anukalpa. Anukalpa means the substitute things of what we find in Nepal, what we find here, and we adapt to that one. And then, like as Harvey said before, we are never disconnected. We are connected all the time. Only the thing is to remind ourselves that I belong to this place. I breathe the air here. I live on this land here. I hear the sound of the river here, the birds and the animal beings all. And the animistic aspect, the psychology and ecology, the sense of belonging ourselves to that environment, and then supporting the people, like a person, our friends, our groups, or the students, where they come from, and to support them, to help them to find those power places of nature, how that place, how that space, how the plant species there, or the animal beings, or the caves, or specific type of mountains, or how we can connect to that, how it can affect us. And I always remind myself, like we have a tradition, like before eating the food, we offer 5 times outside, or Sometimes we eat 5 times very fast, and then only we start eating regularly. The 5 times, the 5-time thing is like reminding us that we are made out of these 5 great elemental beings. And our relationship, my relation with my spirit, that has created my own body, my emotions, my spiritual aspect, and the same thing that has made the environment where I live. And in this way, honoring, reminding myself that what creates outside creates me. And the animistic, the shamanistic spirituality, whatever term we may use, I think every time this reminds us how important the environment, how important the species, how important other humans are. We may look different. We are molded by the geography, by the terrain where we live. But when we look at those basic principles, the conducting forces that are uniting, that unite us, that create the bridge of connection between us, I think we can have a bigger space, a wider space to communicate, to converse, to find common things that can connect us together, and find a wider space to find our own personal answers, and also to find the answers for others, and to bring a sense of belonging and respect to not only between humans, but the nature, but all that is being created. I think that would really help in that sense of belonging, the sense of honoring every being. So when we say animism, in our language we call jibbad. Jibbad means honoring the presence of spirit in every form, in every way, in everywhere. And when we speak from our perspective, like we hold the rice grain, or we hold a glass of water, or we took a twig of a plant, or we take the feather of a bird, and then when we hold that, we know what we are holding, what is connected to that one, and we activate that one to connect at a much, much deeper and wider perspective. And we bring the person to get connected to that. So this sense of belonging ourselves to where we live, and to expand, to recognize, to honor what is there, I think this is a big thing. And the discussion here in this panel, I think, is so helpful, so important for me to remind myself and our participants to remind how important we are, how indigenous we are to the land, to the place where we are living at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much to each of you. Yeah, there's a lot that gets lit up for me in a good way listening to each of you. And so just to underscore and echo back a little on what's already been shared, I appreciate, Graham, your attention to how we're framing things. And that it's something I know I've heard you speak to as well, that the idea that there's such a thing as nature is a harmful fiction, that there is an environment that is not including of humans, and or that, I don't know if you would say it quite the same, but I find a similarly problematic reinforcing of the problem in the way we think of culture, as if humans have culture, but the other than humans don't. And whereas a lot of what we would claim as our own culture perhaps is actually an inspiration or movement of the land where we're at, or the other than human spirits moving through human form. And so just appreciating your attention to not, one of the things that helps is to not unconsciously recreate the problem as we go and how we frame things. And Shannon, your attention, and it's something I've seen a ton. It's like the singular most common question in the ancestral reconnection work, which is, for a lot of people, it's emotionally threatening, but it's more familiar because you're relating with human form ultimately still. So it's not the leap to relate with the mountain spirits. Some people would rather relate with the mountain spirits than their family, so that's understandable. But in any case, the question even there that comes up more than any other question is, how do I know I'm not making this up? This is not, is this real? Whatever. If I get into a conflict with my spouse or my kids or a close friend, I might be like, it's your fault or it's my fault or what, this or that. But my first reaction isn't, are you real? Like, so there's not a tendency to do that with our other human relationships. But if we haven't been really settled and encouraged to embrace our relatedness with the rest of life, when we're shaky or things are uncertain, we'll doubt the whole thing. And I see that as a kind of wounding from, we could say, colonialism, or from a more reductionistic framework that, and so in that way, from a more intellectual angle, like, let us embrace and articulate animist epistemologies, ways of knowing, ways of having valid communication that are not so reductionistic, that include intuition, dreams, synchronicities, etc. And that when people are devaluing those ways of knowing, or when you're doing that to yourself, to try to catch it and to notice, like, oh, this is actually, it's not kind, and it's not actually based in reality. This is cutting me off from the rest of life. Let me try it another way. And to what, at least some of what you spoke to, Bhola, I hear this invitation to allow the land where we're at to inform what's happening. And for me, it speaks to how this question of what does it look like a year in to choosing not to reconnect, but to bring more conscious our innate relatedness, right? And I think there's often a kind of like honeymoon phase where it's like, oh my God, I can talk to the trees and my ancestors love me. And I'm like, this is exciting. I'm at a party and there's all these people I haven't met, and it's exciting, right? And what does it look like beyond, like a couple of years beyond that? It's like, oh, I have a little bit of clarity about who I need to talk to at the party or what I need to be doing. My life is reorganizing a little bit to be more authentic with my soul calling here. And then what does it look like a decade in? Not that it's going to look the same for everyone, but it's something I've noticed in my own journey and others' journeys. And I think it's helpful to recognize this, that the ways in which we relate with the spirits, the powers, is going to change over time. And so to anticipate it a little bit, to not be thrown by it when it happens. You might have a lot of ritual formality for a period of time, and then there's a period where it's actually, it doesn't feel authentic to do that because your way of relating is reorganizing. Or you go from a sort of colonialist framework of coming back into relationship with the others. So it's like you're at the party, you don't know the etiquette. Like you're in Spain and you're giving everyone a handshake and they're like, whoa, like, okay, I'll shake your hand. It's not the traditional greeting, but we understand what you mean. Into like becoming more acclimated to being in relationship. And then maybe the way you make decisions about where to travel, what to do, is informed in a regular way by the others. Like what job you take, what you're doing with your time. So instead of a lot of formal ritual as a exotic way you spend your free time, it's actually how you organize your everyday life to be in this echolocation with the rest of life and allowing it to inform your decisions. So that's what it's where my instinct is to go a little bit, is what changes over time as we move through bringing things more conscious into deeper ways of relating. That a last thing on that, and then I'll turn it back to the other presenters, is maybe saying the same thing through a different lens, is what is a deeply relational way of moving in the world? Like, what does it look like to take the the sensibilities we're talking about and let them transform every aspect of our life so that we're moving in partnership. That doesn't happen right away. If the work of like so-called decolonization, at least in the like internal psychological sense, if you will, it doesn't happen right away. It happens bit by bit. And then you look up and you're like, wow, I see the world differently. Like we have a government that's supposedly representative, but it's only representing the humans. How can this be a representative democracy when there are like so many other people that don't have a seat at the table? This is fundamentally problematic. It's unethical, or whatever. Like our views start to change from this deeper place of relatedness. So I'm curious what, mostly to the presenters, wherever the energy's at in the conversation, go there. But if it has energy for you, what have you noticed in your own lives or in supporting others about some of those changes over time after living into an ethic of relatedness for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, 10 generations, etc.?
I'll leap in. Okay, so I think there's a tension in our language between ritual and etiquette, and we very easily talk about ritual as something formal, fixed, given, past, and even a performance that's separate from the rest of life, whereas etiquette maybe gets us a bit nearer to, how do you shake hands? Do you hug? How many times do you kiss somebody when you greet them, if you know them well, or if you want to get to know them better, and so on. So those kind of more everyday bits of etiquette, they're also ritual. And to me, that's one of the shifts that I see. People coming back to a sense that ritual or etiquette, either way, is a good way, a necessary way to engage, especially with the larger than human world, because it's very easy to talk to trees, it's harder to listen. So maybe sitting quietly, listening, being silent, spending time getting to know and becoming known by the other. So, why would a tree talk to you straight away if you just like any other human passing by? So it may take a while for that relationship to build until you and the tree, the rock, the badger, whatever, become familiar enough to find those ways. And I think that ritual, or those increasingly everyday bits of etiquette where we eat the food, whether it's 5 pieces or whether it's we have a ritual once a year or once a week or whatever, where we say thank you to the food who we eat, or whether it's even if we say thank you to somebody else for the food, but especially if we're saying thank you to the food persons who've given us their lives. And so I see people who begin to call themselves animists, or other words that mean the same kind of thing, beginning to reclaim ritual and etiquette between species, and to celebrate those things, not necessarily with great formality. Sometimes there are times for that, but sometimes with flows between humour as well, because relationships are full of humour. Bodies are very funny things, human or otherwise. So yeah, but those kind of encounters and creating those possibilities for those relationships to build up. Sometimes I think it needs rituals, whether it's how you don't want to shake hands with the tree, but can you just walk up to a tree and hug the tree? Is that you wouldn't do it with a strange human. How do you negotiate those introductions? So I think then some kind of discovery of ritual performance gets us through those. And as they change over the 10 years you're talking about, Daniel, we don't drop away those more formal bits of etiquette, the how do you greet a tree, but they become more everyday, but they also become more obvious to us, more acceptable. We just do it in passing, and it takes somebody else being there for us to notice, oh, I've just done that thing again, where I touched a tree in a particular way. So that's my the importance of ritual. And I think that many of the people in this conversation, that's a familiar world and journey to them too, to you too. So, thanks.
For me, I think what I've noticed that has shifted is the sense of personal accountability. When you, at least let me speak in my own experience, there's a sense of like when you're raised for the most part in a Western kind of colonized way, there's a sense of authority that's outside of yourself, that's always holding you accountable. When you come into relation with these other than humans, and they're and to Bhola's point, you are held by them, and you have this intrinsic sense of belonging in the relationships you've been cultivating with them over time. There's this sense of personal accountability that begins to take over, and quite frankly, it's much more soothing and relaxing of an accountability, other than this authoritarian outside kind of othering that comes from the world and, you know, the workhorse ethic of colonialism and the industrial complex and all of the other things that come in that teach you a sense of right and wrong. When you come into relation with these other than humans, there's a sense of being held, even when you humbly don't land things correctly. There's not this sense of the world is going to come to an end and you're going to get punished because you're not good enough, or you're falling too short of your personal destiny. That's a human thing. That's a human construct that was placed upon us. And what I've found over the years is this vast, enormous sense of comfort and belonging and witnessing of my own evolutionary growth in relation to this wider web of relation, where I'm held, and my wisdom is cultivated in a way, because it's not separate from, and I'm not how to say, I do want to recognize that when you come to a bigger power, you know that it's a bigger power. Full stop. It's kind of like you humble yourself before it, but also, oh, there's so much love, and there's so much joy, and there's so much compassion, and there's not a sense of you're not perfect. You haven't come to me in an imperfect way. And so over time, your nervous system begins to like deregulate and downshift, because you can go to the bigger powers with your shortcomings and not feel judged by them. That's it, really, mostly. In my evolutionary thing, I've found me like literally not taking myself so seriously anymore, which is an enormous sense of cultivating of joy that comes as a benefit in the wider web of relating. Is like, oh yeah, stop taking yourself so seriously all the time. And so I find great joy in bringing that source of like wellspring to people who are just stepping into, am I making this up? Like, are spirits real? Do they really accept me? Will they accept me? But I don't look the right way, or I don't sound the right way. Such human constructs. Like, yeah. I just encourage everyone who hasn't like taken that deep step into being so well held to just dip your toe a little bit more in the water every step of the way. And yeah, Bhola.
I think this question is very interesting. It brings something like Daniel in the beginning spoke about the ancestry and things, and then like the the vacation. Now, if I remind myself, the biggest celebration for us have been, now it's changed, but before, our biggest celebration was celebration to remember the ancestors. Remembering ancestors and the changes of season and transplanting rice and harvesting time. These have been the biggest rituals that and the celebrations that I remember most. And for us, there is no question about organizing a vacation, because for us, vacation time is like going on a pilgrimage. Because we make kind of, not promise, but it's like a relation. We activate the beings, the different kind of caretakers, and for any reason, if there is any kind of problem, then we make kind of a promise to say that next year during this full moon or this new moon or during the solstice time, I come and I bring this offering and fulfill the responsibility, the promise I have taken. So it is, I think these things are like culture-based and the place-based. Only like 15, only it's about 15 or 20 years that we know a little bit about going on vacation somewhere. Otherwise, all have been about the celebration and about honoring the things. And here, when it comes to the ancestry and the connection, that we have three factors important. It reminds me now, our way of looking at three things. The three principal factors affect our being, both physical, spiritual, or personality, about our health also. So these three factors we have, so it's like this. So we say the lineage protector. So lineage protector is represented by the fire, the thumb finger here, lineage protector. Then the ancestors. And our principal mentor, we say mentor, but our spiritual guide. These three things make a tripod. And we are like a pot in a cauldron put up here. These three factors that mold, that create, that give us the sense of belonging, sense of harmony, that sense of flow, the impressions of the lineage and the ancestors, and how we take life. Of course, we are so much like influenced by outside factor, as our friends previously spoke about, living in a wider, bigger communities, we celebrate here, we celebrate there. We don't take the things so seriously. We just let go certain things just like that, to be with, we need that also, of course. We have to loosen our that, we can say that regulation. When we loosen that, we see other things, but we are like unknowingly, or a little bit kind of thing being deviating sometimes away. But these factors are always alive with us. They are always like we say, you know, like the ancestors go wherever we go. The ancestors follow where we go. So the ritualistic way of living, as Harvey said, you know, the ritualistic way of living, this celebration, these seasonal things, and being in the place and following the norms and the festivities and the culture of the place. I think we have so much possibilities today than we had before. The world is no more a world. It has become really a wider family where we can, through this extended family, we can learn so much, we can share so much, and we can find the common things that we can all celebrate together. And we can do the inner celebrations that is related to our lineage and ancestors. And we can do like a bigger celebrations, not necessarily about other things, but about the change of nature, change of season, like the full moon thing, and we can say, like we have the big festival, like if we speak about Nepal, we have the big festival to honor the Naga serpents, the bringer of fertility and the rain and the force of change. And we have the festivities to go on a pilgrimage to honor the keepers of, as we said before, the land, the mountain, the places there. I think that the language may sometimes limit what we want to say. So maybe we need the language like more affordable, more understandable to many of us, and then to be able to share, to be able to open up, so that there is possibility that we can connect more and more, and we appreciate others more and more. When there is no appreciation, because there's only one way, only the easterly winds are moving, bringing rain, and only the westerly winds are moving, bringing only the dryness. We need, I think, both the easterly and the westerly winds moving and find the common things that where the plants can grow. So there is sunlight, there is wind, there is rain also enough, so that our, I think, cultures can still be stronger, better, from the regional to the international. And I think not other things, but I think the rituals connected to the honoring the ancestors' lineages and honoring the nature and the like festivities done by some people in some part of the world, and to support, to encourage. Today's world is not much about, I think, finding a teacher. It is more about where the teachings would fall. Who is going to hold? Who will hold our next generation's teachings? What we are doing today, who is going to hold? Biggest challenge for today is to cultivate and create the next generation to hold the wisdom what the ancestors have been giving. And as we all know that with so much technology, it's a great gift. Because of the technological gift, we are here, we can connect throughout the world here. It's a time to celebrate, to be able to speak to and to share. On the other hand, we have like more kind of confusion in information and all, so many things. And with this type of confusion back and forth, what to choose, where to go, what is the right thing or what's the wrong thing, I think it is time again to remind ourselves and to get into that flow of river, that flow of our connection to the lineage, to the ancestry, to make it stronger, to celebrate that more, and respect the cultures, the traditions and practices of other people. I dedicated 2 years of my time during this COVID to connect to our elders in our villages and places to speak out. And finally, I've been able to create a book, the biography of the shamans' biography, the elders' biography, what role the place played for them where they lived, what role the lineage played, what role the spirits of the place played, and how much role the teachers, the human teachers played. And now, after 13 interviews, the 13th chapter, I perfectly came that every being, everyone who is called needs a human teacher. That human teacher becomes the pillar of support. And here, the time of, I think, distraction, back and forth, suffering, so many things, like not like losing the sense of belongingness, I think this kind of thing, having an elder, having a teacher, reverence to the teacher, learning from the teacher, maintaining that practice and reconnecting, or we can say reminding our, like Daniel said before, like our relation with ancestry and lineage, and that relation is connected to the earth and the elemental beings. All the impressions, not all, most of the impressions are left here, and through those impressions we are trying to again connect to that and remind ourselves of that greater belongingness. Thank you.
Thank you so much to each of you. In the 20 minutes or so that we have remaining, I'd like to open it up to some folks who have wanted to bring a question, those who are with us. And I know, Caitlin, you had something you wanted to ask, so let me make space for that. And if you want, just say a word about where you're calling in from.
Sure, my name's Kathleen Matthews. It said Kathleen rather than Caitlin because it's Irish.
Yeah, thank you.
And, I'm coming from Oxford today. And my question was about, I've worked with the healing of ancestral disconnection over 30 years now. And I've always found that when we step into that animist relationship, that we ourselves no longer feel abandoned, which is one of the things we always accuse our ancestors of having done to us, I find very strange. But I was wondering if the presenters would kindly like to say what has been most helpful to them to enter into that wider belonging, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. I could say a thing about it. For me, at least, a few things. One is practice. And regardless of the tradition that I've evolved in at any given time, practices, not just thinking about it, not just reading about it, not just trying to understand it, but actually just spending time doing whatever the practice is, whether it's making offerings, sitting in sweat lodge, meditating, prayer, like, okay, these are the practices you do. Let me do a bunch of those practices. To trust that there's a wisdom in the actual time spent doing the thing, whatever it is. Another for me is good therapy, and just, spending 20 years on and off in good therapy or things like it, and carving out the places of my own kind of stuckness emotionally, my own inner work, etc. And so recognizing that that's not aside from the path, that's really critical, actually, to know how to show up well in relationships. And then the last thing that comes to mind really is the focus on the ancestors for me. And I don't know that that's as critical for people in other places necessarily. But for me, as someone who is down lineage from a lot of disconnection, there's a certain amount of amnesia required to operate in a system that's based on white supremacy, colonialism, occupation of land, enslavement of other people, and the unmetabolized grief and harm and mess from those histories. And so turning like seeing my own ancestors caused me to reevaluate my relationship with family and to be less judgmental and to see myself as not only down lineage from harms enacted toward others, but to see the ways in which earlier traumas in Europe led to then exporting that trauma to a lot of the rest of the world, and to apply the ritual technologies to bring about healing to my lineages. That has created a foundation from which to engage in a more respectful, grounded way with traditions that are not of my ancestry, but which are welcome and open, and to be able to learn from folks in other lineages in a way that I'm like a regular sized person. I'm able to value who I am and, not see myself as less or more than others. So that's been really important for me. I think it's my observation that folks who they're not born into and they're not raised with a framework for relating with their ancestors would benefit from reacquiring some framework like that, whatever it might be. Some folks already have it. They're like, why do you need that? I sat in a teaching years ago with a Tibetan Bon teacher, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and I appreciated what he was teaching about. And I asked him, do you teach about ancestor stuff? And because I don't see it in any of your teachings per se, but is that something you all practice? And he was like, yeah, like his answer was like, yes, obviously. It's like I asked him, do you all brush your teeth? It's like, it's almost like a rude question in a way. And I wanted to be like, everybody at your talk doesn't have that framework, right? I'm like, it's as if he was seeing it, maybe it's my own projection, as a point of cultural hygiene, that it just like, why would you not do that? But then the lack of that framework, I think, can really impact our ability to receive other kinds of teachings. So that's been important for me. And I'll say that. And others feel welcome to chime in if you wish about what would, what's really helped you. What's one thing?
I'll just echo Daniel that, practice, because knowledge isn't about winning pub quizzes or even getting degree exams sorted out. It's to be done. That's what I keep being told by people. And I've been in places where people have taken me out into the desert and not explain what they're going to do, just do it, and then drop you back at your hotel and you went, what was that about? It's about doing, it's not about explaining, and so on. Sometimes you should be left alone. And then maybe similarly, sometimes the big thing in my practice is let other people do the bits they're good at. So I don't have a good way to engage with folk that some of you are calling spirits or ancestors. So I'm grateful to the shamans among you that you look after that bit of human community with the larger world, while I play with the river and the trees and so on. So I think that we all do what we're good at, and all together we hopefully make the world a better place. But I don't think we don't all need to do all the same thing. So I think there's that, learn to practice and learn that there are limits to what you can do yourself. So thanks, good question.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah. Shannon or Bhola, anything you want to add on that?
I think that's a very interesting question. That sense of belonging, the sense of family, the sense of lineage, the sense of ancestry, the sense of going to visit the places where ancestors lived. I think these pilgrimages, visiting to the places and finding out more about them. What is wrong? Actually, what went wrong? What does it mean not to be in a relationship with them? Whether it is about the living or the ones who have already crossed over. So, of course, we do so many rituals and practices and accompaniment of the soul after departure and yearly reminders honoring them. But the biggest thing I think is as long as we are in body, to find a language and to find a good environment to be able to talk and to reconcile and find a way, because the way today we think about our fathers, even my father is 108 years old, and like if we speak about the shift of culture, my father had never experienced this birthday cake, and his great grandchildren brought a big cake, and then they made a celebration. Otherwise, we invoke Mahakala for longevity and well-being. So from the recitation of Mahakala, now we have adopted writing 108 in a cake and then cutting with a knife there. So, so you know, these are shifts. Like, as long as I think our elders, our family members' relations are in body, I think the biggest thing is to be able to reopen the communication and to reconcile. And many a time where we are today and what happened 20 years ago, we have difficulties to think about it. So when we go back to that time, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, what the situation was, I think there we find the answer, how we can reconcile and then to be together again. If it is about the ones who have already crossed over, then there are so many ways of working, supporting, and as Daniel said, you know, the practices, exercises, the sense of belonging and appreciating and supporting and doing the practices. Thank you. May all be good. May you get reconciliation and things come to terms.
Thank you, Bhola. Shannon, anything you want to add there? It's okay if not to.
Mostly just to say it's really about connection. So it is about the practice. It's just making the connections and continuing to visit those connections and strengthen those relationships over time. So sometimes it's like when people come to do like an ancestral healing session, they might drop in and no one has tended those relationships for years and years and years. So it's hard to make those connections. And if we're reestablishing those connections, it's continuing to not just, okay, they're all well in spirit now and I don't have to connect with them anymore. So it's that returning to the practice and that continuation of the connection with them and to really invite them in. It's like what I often say is like, I don't see a differentiation anymore of like having to go into a big ritual to connect with my ancestors. I just invite my grandmother to cook jambalaya with me every time I cook jambalaya. It's like she's right there, and there doesn't really need to be a big ceremony in order to do these things. So just over time, and I think that the biggest thing that has really just become very embodied to me, as Bhola said, just this embodiment of it is just invoking them. So the prayer that brings them to us and how we call them to us, to me, is where the music is and where the harmony is. Yeah. Thanks for that. It's a beautiful question.
Shannon. Yeah. The one thing I'll add, which has been, I mean, I think it's something especially Bhola spoke to, but also Shannon. And then I see Spirit, Linda Davenport, you have a hand up. We can go there. Sometimes it's surprising just how available the others are. And sometimes we can get in a habit of feeling like we need to earn it or to work for it, or we're not worthy, or whatever it might be, or that it's some like great honor to relate with the trees or whatever. But it is. And also the others are like, yeah, relax. Like, hey, like you never stopped being there. You just stopped paying attention in the relationship. So we're happy to have you back. Also, by the way, humans are completely hemorrhaging biological diversity on Earth and invoking catastrophe on the planet. So if you would be willing to help with that, that'd be great. But otherwise, good to see you. You know, so there's a sense of one thing I found, I'll add something about the other question, is how does a relationship deepen? Well, sometimes at the start of a friendship, let's say, you just meet someone, they're not really sharing their most painful places in the first time hanging out. And that might evolve over time. And when we come into relationship with the earth and the spirits and all that, often after that honeymoon phase, there can be a sense of like, great, now that we've established that we're real and you're real and we can actually relate, oh, check this out. And then they start to bring us responsibility and more complex kinds of pain that can build trust. And like, here's our shared work together, and it's joyful to be in relationship around it. So in that way, the relationship becomes more nuanced and more like family over time. Linda, do you want to share a thing? Yeah, go ahead.
I just have to breathe, because this is my very first time being exposed to this form of energy about the ancestors and animism. I'm just new to this. And it just opened me up so wide. I have a picture on my wall of nature. And I went into that nature picture just listening to all the presenters. And I'm just breathing so expanded. I felt so lonely all by myself, and just to know that I'm not really lonely, that I can be with nature, the trees, and listen to the birds and the heavens and all of this. And when I feel lonely and stressed and depressed, that I'm making that up, that all I have to do is remember. You all are telling me that all I needed to do was remember, that I was never disconnected. And I am so, that lift, like, oh my God, I feel so light. I'm so excited, and I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you for showing up for me, Daniel. I don't know how I came aware of you, but I'm thanking the gods for it. I'm just thankful for you. Thank you so very much. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to leap in here and say,
yeah, Graham.
So next time you feel you're alone, so roll up your sleeve and touch this piece of your arm, just that inner elbow, right? In there are 5 tribes of bacteria. That's where they live. You are their home. So you're never going to be alone. Inside you, there are other bacteria. So when you think you're eating, you don't get any nutrients unless they eat it first. So you're sharing a meal every time you eat, okay? So you don't have to go out, leave your room to find nature, whatever that is. Sorry, that's another obsession of mine. Just touch your elbow, eat some food, and you're in these amazing relationships. I mean, I don't know what these bacteria are doing there other than thinking you're real estate. But I mean, maybe they're making your elbow crook softer than it would be if they weren't there. Whatever it is, we're grateful. But there they are. And that's just one bit of what you think is you. You're part of this whole amazing community of life, even without ever leaving a room. How's that?
Thanks, Graham. Yeah. Why don't we do a final, just a final minute or two from each of the 4 of us, because we're about at time. I'll remind that our courses are open, and check out what we're up to at Ancestral Medicine. The whole organization is about reintroducing these kinds of sensibilities in an inclusive, international, non-dogmatic way. But the last thing I'd say is I would invite each of you in your own ways to envision the kinds of values we're talking about being mainstream, being normal. I actually have I appreciate your work, Graham, on this, that it's not about belief. That's like a Protestant angle on animism, that it's more about how we're moving, what we're doing in our everyday life. And so how would it be to have our like elected representatives, like, yeah, of course, I'll be representing those in my district, including the woodpeckers, the groundhogs, the stream, the stones, the spirits of land, etc. Those are the ones in my district. And to have folks who are working for activism, change, social justice, repairing systemic, harms, to recognize that those harms are also toward the other than humans, and that the strategy for organizing is informed by the spirits of the land and the ancestors and the rivers and the stones. Of course, some folks do it like that. I think a lot of indigenous folks in the Americas have that sensibility really dialed in, and in other places as well. But may our institutions, in a really normal way that doesn't have to be religious or spiritual, normalize ethics and relationships that include the others. And may we embody that personally and let it become more established and more normal, from how we live and how we model things. So that's what I would wrap with. Graham, Shannon, Bhola, any final words?
Yeah.
I was trying not to be the first there. Good.
Please, Graham, go ahead.
No, you started. You carry on.
Okay. I think the good idea, you have already started planting the seed, and I think each of us are practicing. So I think, share what we practice in everyday life. I think that makes the practice, that makes, I think, the transmission more lively, more strong, and to support folks who need help, who need to remember, and giving importance to the ancestry and lineage. I think that is a big thing. That is the biggest source. That is the biggest source. So walking the ancestors' path, ancestors walking our path. So ancestors follow where we go. That means how we take life, how we act, how we react, how we have everyday life, what connection, what relationships we generate with the humans, with all the beings. I think that keeps a relationship stronger and more profound. And coming back to the question before, our reminders from time to time, like before we eat a meal, a part of the food and the drink is spared, separated in the name of the ancestors' lineage, the earth mother, the rain bringers and all. So first we offer a part of that to them as gratitude and thank for this life, for everything. Then only we enjoy the meal. I think there are some very, simple practices. They don't look otherworldly, but like quite a regular thing, simple practices to express gratitude for the life, for everything, for our relation, for our connection. I think the work, we all are in our way bringing together and walking this path. I think this is profound. I think This needs continuity, this needs support, this needs institutional support and personal support. And then we have to keep up the things that we have been in Daniel, the work that we have been doing, as I think brought profound changes in so many people. I think we need this. We have to continue this one without giving, like, as you said, spiritual, religious, or anything, but to keep on doing, like, the changes. When we change and we can bring this change to others change, bring the others, then I think this way the practices at the practical level are like shared, and that brings a great change in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhola. I think Shannon or Graham, by way of weaving out.
Shall I leap in then? Oh, Shannon, you're about to speak there.
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, Graham. You were up next.
Okay, thanks. And then you can have the last word. Great. One of the fine things that happened at the COP26 climate talk in Glasgow late last year was not only the number of indigenous communities around the world and the number of environmental activists of various kinds coming together, but the number of voices of those larger parts of the larger world that were at least represented by humans, but were being listened to as well by many of the people there. I mean, maybe not everybody in the actual gathering inside the official discussions, but some of them too. Some of the some of the climate scientists engaged in those discussions are very much in tune with the kind of songs that we're singing. They're very much saying, this is the way the world is. We need to listen to these other species. We need to be respectful. We need to leave the oil in the ground and so on. And yeah, so that was great. We need to keep encouraging those people, the scientists, the economists and the politicians to follow along. But I think, things are changing. So I was feeling much more hopeful at that point that we're not just we are a bunch of strange people, but we're not alone. So it's a good time to be alive. Thanks.
And I think I would like to leave us all with this sense of that we all need to come home to ourselves, to allow ourselves to belong to ourselves, and to notice that if you bring your awareness into your body, the places that you don't feel like you're at home in yourself first. Because it's really hard to feel rooted and connected to family, to friends, to humans, much less the other than human web of relation, if you don't have a sense of sovereignty and agency in yourself. So to first start by allowing yourself to belong in your own body, and then to notice from when you're in your own body, that first layer of connection is your beloved healed ancestors. And those connections that they are driving behind you, these forces of support, you are the face of their lineage. You are, if you will, you are their pride. And so just allowing that to land in you even a step further as you move forward in your life, and to feel that when you put your foot upon the earth and you step out of your front door, you are supported and you belong to the lands, to the spirits of place where you're anchored, and to the ground, to the microbes, to the bacteria, to the root system, to the waterways, and to the ones who you've not maybe even met yet. These larger powers that know you and love you, that understand your destiny, that they're always guiding you. But coming home to ourselves first, I feel like a lot of us, because the world, life is hard. We just went through COVID and we're still going through COVID, and there's impacts of war, and it creates conditions where we even abandon ourselves. We have to come home first. And in that, we can then start to invite these trusted powers to us. Yes. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Bhola. Thank you each really for your service in the world. And there's a lot of people that each of you are touching in different ways and lifting up and helping along. And so thank you for that. And to everybody present, you know, who in each in your own ways that I don't know about are doing good works in the world. Like, may we value our unique, specific self and our contributions and our ability to bring goodness to the world. I think there's a need for a almost unreasonable amount of self-love and self-esteem in order to just be here and to lean all the way in. So may we have that. And just a very final thought is that if, like Linda shared, if some of what we're speaking to is actually new to you as a way of understanding, to know that you're really not alone. There's, besides all of your ancestors who, for most of the last 300,000 years of our particular subspecies, have been seeing the world something like this, there's also a lot of folks alive right now who have a similar sensibility. So feel encouraged to reach out and make those connections wherever you can find them. It matters to be helped along in that way. And yeah, thank you all very much. Thanks to the spirits and the others who lean in and who we've been talking about, but not talking to so directly right now. But appreciation for all of you also. Thanks. Shane.